Okay, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Greenfield School Committee Budget and Finance Subcommittee on December 9th at 12:34 p.m. And we have as our first item on the agenda public comment. I do not see any members of the public present, so I'm going to move on from that. Our second item is discussion in regards to making a recommendation related to the process of approving warrants. So as you know, sorry, Karen, what was that?
The second is to approve your minutes from September
Oh,
24th.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry. That's okay.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Uh, correct. The second item is to approve the minutes from our September meeting. Uh, I will move to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and any discussion? Okay, then, I am a yes. Member Childs,
Yes.
Member Deneve.
Yes.
Okay. That carries unanimously. And now we may move on to discussing the warrant process. So as you will recall, this came up at our most recent school committee meeting, and the committee delegated it to us to discuss and come back with a recommendation. And I have a few things to share to start with, and then we'll open that up for discussion. So, firstly, I'm not entirely sure that this should be under budget and finance since this is a policy of the school committee. So I might be inclined actually to send this back to the committee and move it to the policy subcommittee. That being said, I did go ahead and go through I'll go through some history as far as I recall it, and then I also did a bunch of research on the MASC policy database to see what other people are doing on this front. So in the past, the committee used to require a majority, which would be 4 members, to sign warrants. And as I recall, this was changed during my tenure on the committee, at least in part because there was frequent difficulty getting 4 signatures by the time required. And I recall Vera sending email after email looking for 3 more signatures and 2 more signatures, please, just 1 more signature before the deadline. So the committee decided to change this policy and allow 1 member to sign off on any given warrant, and that's what we are now doing. So that is what I recall, and I welcome anybody else's recollections that were there at the time. And then I did go ahead and go through the database, which we are now on MASC website, to see what kind of policies are out there on other committees, just for reference. So what I found there was, and I did not get through the entire database, but I went through a lot of it. I think I got to like the T's on it, and found 41 other committees that have a policy similar to ours right now. They have 1 member designated. And the next largest group that I found was actually unclear. Like, they say that their school committee will approve warrants, but it doesn't say what their procedure is. And there was a small but substantial set that have a policy stating that their school committee or a subcommittee of at least 3 members will approve warrants. That's related to some other committees that either delegate this to their budget and finance committee members, or they have a specific warrant subcommittee that does this. And Then on the smaller side, there were some committees that simply say a majority. One of them said a majority or the chair or their designee if there aren't enough members available. There were a small number that approve their warrants at meetings, but one of them delegates it to their Budget and Finance Subcommittee if they have only one meeting that month. So these are committees that have more than one meeting in a month. And what else? There were a few that delegate this specifically to their chair. So their chair is always the person signing. And then there were a few outliers. There was one that delegates this to their secretary. There were two that happen to have a treasurer position on their school committee, and that person owns this responsibility. There was one that designated the chair of their Budget and Finance Subcommittee to always do this, and one more I saw that had 3 members signing warrants on a rotation designated by the Budget and Finance Chair. So that's what I could find so far. And it seemed like certainly by far the largest group are doing it the way we do it right now. So that's all I have for background information, and I will open this topic for discussion. Sorry, Member Denny.
I don't mind if we do one signature or multiple signatures, however that works the best for all of the committee members I support. My issue is that I would like to be able to ask questions about the warrants and find out what is going on with different charges and see, get questions answered if they don't seem transparent enough. And also, we learn a lot by looking at the warrants about, what contracts might be up or things to look at. I mean, there's a reason that we have to look at them. So it just seems odd to me to be required to look at them, but not get to ask questions about them specifically. And I just don't have time uh, in my volunteer capacity to pick up the phone every week and have conversations to piece out little things. I'm happy to send emails if I have questions or whatever, but it just seems like uh, all the other committees that I've talked to discussing warrants and asking questions about them is always part of their process as a full committee. And I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes or get involved in day-to-day business. I mean, 90% of them are, perfect and seem reasonable and fine and are not on my radar. And then there are some that come up where I'm like, what is this? And it's our job to ask those questions. So for me, it's the feeling routed at every turn when I want to ask questions about it. And there seems to be some sort of feeling like we can't have the discussion in a public forum, but that's public money. So that's where my feeling is on it and where I begin and end on it. However, the warrant process works for the group is absolutely fine with me. And my recollections of how it went down is the same as yours.
Are you inclined to have warrants be on the meeting agenda every month? Or
yeah, I think it should be on the meeting agenda. That is best practice. I mean, we spoke with so many different committees in our area at MASC in Hyannis, and a lot of them said, well, of course it's on our agenda and we can discuss them, and that's an important part of our role. So I would like to see them on the agenda, knowing that most of the time no one's going to have anything to say or bring anything up. But also I think it, is an incentive to make things a little bit more, I don't want to say transparent, but maybe more well written as invoices, because there are things that sort of lead to nowhere.
Member Childs?
So with us meeting once a month, how do we handle the timeliness issue if we're putting them on the agenda?
Do you mean in terms of the amount of time the meeting takes, or do you mean in
I
terms of
mean,
posting items?
well, I mean in terms of, so we get the warrant and it needs a pretty fast turnaround. So how does that work if we're meeting once a month?
Well, right. So we receive warrants more frequently than we meet. So I don't think it would be possible to put the warrants on our monthly agenda for approval because then they won't get approved in time. Um, that's not to say that they cannot be on the agenda for the purpose of questions. Um, I would have a couple of concerns about that. One being that it takes time to track down information. So when someone has a question, if they're going to ask it during a meeting and not before, then they're not so likely to get the information they're looking for. Unless the superintendent or business manager happen to remember something off the top of their head, but they might need to go tracking something down in order to get the answers. So there's that. And in terms of open meeting law, the general public has a right to know what we're going to talk about in advance at meetings. So probably this is okay. It would be okay, but it feels like a little bit of a gray area to me because if we were to talk about something significant, then it wouldn't necessarily have been, I'm not sure that that would have been proper notice to the public if all the posting said was warrants. Um, like it might need to be more specific, which is a lot of the guidance sort of theme that I think has come out of the Secretary of State's office the last couple of years. Um, my my other worry about it would be the amount of time that we take in meetings because earlier this year we were doing really well and having meetings that were probably like around a couple of hours. But lately, meetings have been dragging on 3 hours, 4 hours. And if we have a additional standing item and there are multiple questions, then yeah, that could add to that problem. So um, I, my preference, I think, would be to have members put together their questions and send them to the superintendent in advance. And if they don't get what is a satisfactory answer to them, to a certain question, then to ask the chair to put it on the agenda for the next meeting, provided that they do that before the posting requirement.
So how does that differ from what we're doing now? Because at present time, we can feel free to email these questions.
It doesn't, that it's not, that would not differ from what we're doing right now. Except that we could spell it out more explicitly that members please, provide their warrant related questions to the superintendent like 1 week before the meeting. And if they do not have a satisfactory answer to one of their questions, to request the chair put it on the agenda, at least like 72 hours before the meeting. That way the posting can be updated. Does that sound interesting to people? I don't know. I'm just talking, so.
I don't know if you can see, but Elizabeth has her hand up.
I can't see you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I will formally
Sorry.
raise my hand. I'm
Here we
sorry.
go. Go ahead.
I totally agree with you, and I'm glad that you brought it up. And yes, I don't want meetings to go on longer, and I don't want anybody to have to do too much extra work, and I don't want there to be any gotcha scenarios. Like I understand. Um, the thing, we've never really talked about the warrants. At least in the time that I've been here, we've only just changed the signature requirement, but we've never really talked about a process, how we discuss them, how we handle them. So I'm just talking about the process, and making one is a wonderful first step. Um, and I feel like we could find some sort of middle ground where the members feel like they can do the job that they're supposed to be doing, not adding to anyone's workload or extending meetings, but also doing the the oversight that's required. So some sort of marriage of the two concepts, I think, is needed to be spelled out in an explicit way so that we know what we're doing. Um, and if that function is emailing, and saying I have questions about, warrant 4, 5, and 6, then that's fine. But I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's just, it needs to be, it's part of what we have to do, and it needs to be welcomed, because that's unfortunately like a big part of our job. Otherwise, what is the point if we're just going to rubber stamp everything and not understand what we're doing?
Isn't
So
that
how
the
do we reach?
continual question about the
Yeah.
existence of subcommittees? Yeah, I
How
get
do
you.
we reach the compromise where we're not just rubber stamping and we're understanding, but we're also not adding to anyone's workload, I
Yeah.
guess is the question.
Well, so how about this idea? If we set a procedure that the chair has a designated place in their planning template for each agenda for warrant questions, and that members provide their warrant related questions to the superintendent, at least Karen, chime in here if this is totally unreasonable, at least a week of ahead of time. And then forward to the chair any unsatisfactorily answered question by 3 days before the meeting. That way there's always a space in the planning of the agenda for this purpose, and there's a reasonable expectation of members putting their questions out there enough in advance to get an answer, and putting unanswered questions, non-satisfactorily answered questions to the chair for that space in the agenda. That is way too many words. I'm sure there's a more concise way to say that.
No, Kate, I appreciate that. And I think Andy will also chime in agreement. We're happy to answer questions on the warrant. I've only ever received one since my time being superintendent. So I'm intrigued by the conversation that is ongoing about warrants, but I'm happy to answer questions. And if I don't know them at a meeting when they're asked, I'm happy to research it and answer it further. And so is Andy. So happy to, talk about adding the agenda template for questions that they may feel are unsatisfactorily answered, but we are just happy to answer questions on the warrant too.
My question for you is, would that be a reasonable amount of time? Because that's 4 days, basically, potentially, between when somebody asks you a question and when they would be receiving whatever information you're available or able to provide before that 72 hours before the meeting.
I think members would just have to make sure that if they feel the answer is unsatisfactory, that they're letting the chair know to put on the agenda. That's like, I can
Right.
give an answer, but sometimes I don't know if the answer is unsatisfactory or not, if no one actually responds back and wants either more information or wants it on the agenda for further discussion. So the
Right.
timeliness, I think, will be on the interpretation of my answer by the member who has asked.
Yeah, right. So basically, we're saying, here's the meeting. 7 days before the meeting, a person needs to send you their questions. And then within the next 4 days, you're gonna be able to provide whatever you can provide for information about their question, and then 3 days before the meeting, no later than that, they need to be letting the chair know, and I think it would be the expectation would be, to let the chair and the superintendent know that you have a question that has not been fully answered, in your estimation, and you would like it on the agenda. That way it can make it into the posting in time. It's so that I feel like I have to ask Glenn about that because I also don't know if that 72 hours is gonna be, like, reasonable for him and administrative staff to change a posting because that's footwork too. But, um, I'm just spitballing here, so anybody else, please feel free to chime in with ideas. I'll just say up front, I would not be a fan of designating the, Budget and Finance Chair to sign all the warrants. Can we
No.
not do that? I would veto that one.
Well, so it seems like what we're suggesting is just formalizing what we already technically have in place, but putting the timeline more in a more concrete way. And I think that is a strong enough recommendation to bring to the full committee. Ask Glenn, does this timeline work? Any objections? Okay, cool. Let's put it in writing. This is what we'll do.
Okay. Um, Elizabeth, is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
I think that's a great idea. As long as we have something formally in place and a path for us to follow so that we can do what we have to do, it kind of doesn't really matter as long as everyone is on board with it and we've had the discussion. If we all vote and feel comfortable with it, then we have a path to follow, and that's something we can add to the handbook also, so that members know what
Right.
to do when they have these questions. And I don't think that it has to be a specific amount of time that Karen has to get back to us. I mean, that's so silly. She's so busy. I think that we're all, adults and we know what a reasonable amount of time is. And
Well, yes, but you never know who's going to come onto the committee next
true,
and their general level
true,
of reasonableness. So you should
true. But,
let
the administration is always on top of their communication as far as I've ever experienced. So, I wouldn't be wondering where's my answer until it's been, a month or two. But I mean, I don't know. So
right.
I don't think it has to be like you have 1 week or something. A reasonable amount of time to me would be like several weeks. And I don't think that it has to be set in stone, but maybe some people feel
Right.
like it does. I don't know if that's a deal breaker for some people, but
Well, I think
for
2
me,
weeks
just having a
before would
path
be
is
good,
enough.
but I think 2 weeks would be good, but I don't want people to feel like their question is being, like, postponed or put off or what have you, because,
Yeah,
then
and
probably the most recent warrant, any questions related to it would end up going on the following month's school committee agenda, if that's the way it is, so.
Well, I think that it doesn't, I mean, anytime we discuss the warrants, it's going to be too late to affect the payment of them. I mean,
well,
we
that was my
sign off
question
and
is
they
like,
get paid.
if there's a specific question for an invoice, does that invoice get pulled? We would need to know that ahead of time before warrant processing so that, you know, I've had clients that have done that where their warrant review, now this is before the law was enacted to allow one person to review the warrants, that they would actually, pull those invoices in question off and wait for another month to process while the questions were answered. So like that's a logistical thing that would need to be worked out as to where does the committee feel on a question about an invoice when the goods have been received and or the service is already rendered. Because we can't pay without having the goods received or services
Right,
rendered.
right. I think what we're talking about here is a process for questions and answers about warrants and it being unrelated to the approval of the warrants. So, for my part, I would not like the idea of a bill not getting paid as quickly as possible by our school department. I want us to be reliable. So, uh, I wouldn't want to see language like that attached to it. I
Yeah,
mean,
for
if
me,
there were a
this has
genuine
never been
problem,
about paying bills. Yeah, this isn't about paying the bills at all for me. Even if I had a question about something or thought something needed more clarification, it wouldn't be an impediment for a vendor to be paid. I certainly don't think we should go down that road for myself.
Okay. So I think I'm inclined to present this as a discussion to the school committee on Wednesday, as opposed to making a formal recommendation out of this subcommittee. I'd like for us to tell them what we discussed and put this idea forward, and then ask for it to go to policy.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so I'm not going to make any motion related to it right now. All right, so now I'm going to move on to the last item, which is what I would much rather talk about, which is all the work that has been done over the past several weeks about collecting feedback through outreach to all of our parent affiliated groups, including PTOs and a school council and the CPAC and the LPAC. So I put together a list based on the notes in an attempt to create, or suss out what the themes were. And so I think what I'll do is I will just go over that and then we'll discuss. So the feedback themes. Number one was our need to improve staffing. No surprises there, especially of substitute teachers, IAs, and special education teachers. And as part of that, general support for small class sizes. Then there were themes about SEL needs. So needs for support for continued social emotional learning for students and teachers, for example, an anti-bullying program, access to counseling, and ensuring cultural or linguistic capacity in counseling for our English learners, and professional development in this area for IAs. There was expression of being happy with the high quality instructional materials that the district has been investing in and wanting to continue support for that, and a need for consistent K-5 science curriculum or instructional resources. There is a desire to bring foreign language instruction back to the middle school, a desire for additional arts and music opportunities, which was expressed a number of different ways. So bringing specials to AEL, funding for instrument repair, music non-performance related electives, and vertically aligned arts extracurriculars like theater and music, and a wish for a full-time band director at GHS and GMS. There was across the board desire for in-school enrichment events, as well as more field trips. People expressed technology needs, for example, the Elevation platform to support English learners, Prometheans or smartboards, and document cameras, spare iPads to ensure there is backup for students with disabilities who rely on them for communication, laptops for teachers. There were 2 people who expressed a wish for more librarians and books in the libraries. There was a desire to support developing parents' capacity for understanding their rights in special education, and to support LPAC to LPAC intergroup activities. There was transportation, our forever conversation about transportation, in terms of needs for supporting co-op sports and extracurricular activities, and the LPAC, both for intra and intergroup activities and field trips. And lastly, a wish for a volunteer coordinator or community coordinator or community resource support person for parents. Now, outside of that, there were a number of other needs that might not necessarily fall under the operating budget that were more along the lines of building repair and things that might perchance be capital requests. So a number of repairs noted in need at Federal Street School for the elevator, obviously, stair flooring and railings, sidewalk repair, brick wall in the playground, and door and window issues. AEL has some fence gaps that need closing, and there are wishes there for play structure and cafeteria tables that are sized and designed for 3 to 4-year-olds. And also to have adaptive swings on their playground and an unknown heat issue at Four Corners, where somebody seems not to have been able to turn the heat down in their classroom. So that was what I boiled down as much as I could from the notes, and I will open this topic for discussion. Elizabeth.
I will say that the PTOs were so happy to have us come and check in. And they were thrilled that that door was open to them, and they would like to have us come again whenever we can. And they would also like to make reports to the school committee once in a while. They said maybe quarterly. They also expressed, I asked them for roses and thorns. So a lot of them expressed how they are now feel really empowered being able to get things into the parent update that Karen sends out. They really liked that they were able to send things in and have them added. But the theme across the board for both of my meetings was field trips. They all would like more field trips. That came up right away. So that was the resounding desire that I was met with. But you definitely summed it all up very well, Kate. And the heating issue is that one teacher said that their room is stuck at 90 degrees now and they can't turn it down.
Well, I am sure that's going to be figured out. I don't know why that would be. Okay, Member Childs.
So I first wanted to comment that something else that came up in the meetings that I do think we need to tell Karen is that there was a lot of satisfaction with Karen's leadership. In particular, multiple places cited that the culture coming from on top was very positive and has been really good this year. So I do think we need to give props to Karen for that she is being seen and appreciated.
Thanks, Anne.
But then for staffing with the paraprofessionals, I wonder, because we're doing contract negotiations, so how much can we talk about that right now? I mean, because paraprofessional staffing, pay came up, explicitly pay, because people were worried that, you can be a paraprofessional, it's a hard job physically and emotionally, you don't get paid a lot, or you can go work at McDonald's for same or more money without the responsibilities. So, where does this discussion fit in during negotiation season?
That's a good question because I tried to put those items that I summarized by order of how frequently they were brought up. And so that was number one.
My suggestion would be to discuss with Member Sexton, who's the negotiating representative of the school committee.
Okay.
So, would we do an executive session for that? Or because it is related to bargaining? Or would we invite them to come to one of these subcommittee meetings? How would we go about that
No, it
legally?
would have to be executive session.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about our sub rate? What would be the process for changing that, Karen?
We just increased it, Andy, what, a
Yeah.
year ago or year and a half ago?
Okay, yeah.
I think they just voted at a meeting, but I'd have to look back at the minutes to increase, so.
That's what I recall too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, would we be able to get some information about the current rate at which we are filling needed subs with subs and not with other staff?
When would you need that by?
Not by Wednesday. I
Thank
just
you.
sorry, I
I was
should
like,
preface
whoa,
that.
that's a task.
Sorry, no, not by Wednesday. No, but sometime, before the January meeting would be great.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know if there are, do you have any other suggestions, Karen, about improving staffing? Because this is such a wide issue. By wide, I mean everybody is having staffing problems. And these three positions that have been brought up as having staffing issues are probably the same ones that everybody else is having too, the most, with instructional aides and substitute teachers and special education. So is there anything on your in your plans or on your wish list to do about that?
Well, it's, as you mentioned, it is not a greenfield issue. It is a educational issue. It's a universal. I mean, I just was at my doctor's office the other day and they have a huge sign that says the whole world is understaffed. Please be patient. And I chuckled to myself and said, oh, can I borrow your sign? Because I think people have forgotten the whole world really is having staffing issues. With that said, that doesn't help us on a daily basis. So Stephen and I are constantly trying to be creative and backflip and try to find alternative ways to fill positions. It's just a lot of those ways don't garner people. I do cold calls every day. I have my admin assistant just go on and, people that sign up for other jobs that weren't subs or IAs or SPED and see if they're licensed or see if they want a full-time job doing X, Y, or Z because we just don't have the response to postings that we need. We have been working with GCC and HCC with their para pipeline programs that they both have. GCC just talked to us about a grant on training a cohort of Greenfield IAs, but we'd have to find the cohort for them. So like there are things out there that will support people in these positions, but it's finding the people that is the constant struggle for us. And
Right.
I mean, I often think of maybe standing at Court Square on the weekends with a sign because I feel like at some point maybe someone will call me back and want to come, but it's really sad and it's a struggle for us because
Yeah.
we know how valuable these roles are and we know the vacancies and the impact that it creates on our schools, but I don't know how to create people out of nothing. And that's where we're at right now, especially as it's getting later in the school year. And we just keep trying and trying. I've even, asked volunteers if you really want to just volunteer, you really want to come and work for us full time. So
Right.
we try everything to try to see if we can get them in, but
Right. Well, I was wondering, when you mentioned volunteers, I had a little question about whether it would be possible to hire a recruiter, someone whose job it is to do all of that footwork. Because I think given the environment we are in, that's a great deal of footwork that needs to get done. And I kind of don't really like the idea of that all being on the superintendent. I mean, it's not like you have anything else to do. So um, I was wondering if, even if that were not a full-time position, if it would be possible to have a half-time recruiter combined with a half-time volunteer community coordinator, which was one of the other items that was suggested in the feedback that we gathered. We did have a volunteer coordinator in the past, which was a part-time position, and we axed it a few years ago. I think it might have been 2022. So you're muted, Karen.
$55,000.
Yeah, I think it was, maybe it was prior to 2022, but you're right, it was a while ago.
Do you feel that that would be potentially helpful? And if so, do we potentially have room for a position like that in FY26, or is it too early to tell?
I appreciate you protecting my time. I do, I don't do all of these things. I have two admin assistants who help in the stalking of our applicants and begging people to take jobs. But I'm not sure even having the person in that role is going to change the outcome, is my worry, is that we will hire someone who will be faced with no applicants or no, you know, we've worked hard to get volunteers in, and, I've seen some processes, where we're reimbursing for fingerprints, and I've seen some things go through, so we're getting more parents to do it, but even the people that then get approved, we don't actually see them coming to do the volunteering. So it's like this catch 22, I'm not sure another person trying to get the people to do this is what is needed. It's on the other end, it's the supply end. So I'm not sure if this is really the answer. I mean, I don't know. I understand that everyone is struggling with not having the staff, and that is affecting daily operations. And I just don't know if that is the answer.
Okay. Did other members have any questions or ideas that they wanted to bring up related to staffing?
The only thing I can say is, so do we request that Glenn put an executive session discussion on the agenda for, would it be this or next month? It'd have to be next
Well,
month,
I don't
right?
think it can be this month.
Yeah.
It could be next month, which is fine. And I will make that request, and I don't think we need a motion to do
Okay.
that. Okay. Now, the next biggest or most frequent ask that was brought up was related to support for social emotional learning related needs. Um, I don't I don't feel the need to get into that unless somebody has something really specific they want to say about it, because we have been talking about this a lot lately, and we know that there's a 5-year plan in place, and this is year 0, and um, there will be improvements, and this will be developing. It's just going to take time, but it will definitely be an integrated part of FY26 planning, I am sure. Did anybody want to say anything about that? Okay. So, Karen, did you want to weigh in on what is needed in order to continue support for HQIM and about the issue of science?
Sure. It's my understanding, and I'll verify with Stephen, that Open SciEd is launching a 5th grade cycle. So it currently is grades 6 through chemistry, which the district has adopted. And so I see it cycling downward towards the elementary as they develop more and more of their program. So that is, I think, ongoing and soon to be released and potentially adopted, if that 5th grade year gets developed in time for the rollout of 2026 or 2025 to 26, sorry.
Right.
So that's something we have on the radar. The support of HQIM, I think, just needs to be clear to this subcommittee because financially it will have an impact ongoing. DESE is very good about year 1 piloting grants and adoption grants, which we have taken advantage of for all of our HQIM adoptions and implementations. But then the sustainability of these materials ongoing is at the expense of the district. So I just want folks to know that we are committed to this investment, but that investment is probably going to be quite costly in supporting that as we move forward for 25 to 26.
Anna or Elizabeth, anything about the instructional materials?
I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me.
Okay. The next piece was about bringing foreign language instruction back to GMS. What, if anything, is our capacity for doing that, Karen? Off the top of your head.
So currently, and I'll give a little more in-depth report Wednesday night. It's in my superintendent's update. We are finalizing the schedule for GHS for next year. So I have a meeting Wednesday morning with the high school folks. And that actually will determine the flexibility of foreign language teachers to potentially be part of their day at the high school, part of their day at the middle school, or if the need for an additional full-time foreign language teacher at the middle school is needed based on numbers, would be potentially a budget request for FY26. So it's definitely, though, in the works. I think the middle school, certainly the administration wants foreign language back and knows that the impact of having it at younger years is beneficial for our students. So we are definitely still looking into that because the loss is felt at the middle school and they are in favor of that as well.
Are we talking about Spanish instruction specifically?
It looks like Spanish, the potential for maybe an 8th grade French. We'll know more as we look at the numbers that the high school has remaining with regards to their scheduling next year.
Okay. And as I recall, the last time that we really talked about this was in the context of a discussion about this potentially coinciding with changing to full year science and social studies at GMS and the requisite additional, I think it was 6 positions, or maybe it was 5 that were going to
No,
come
it
along with
was
that.
6.
So, okay.
But there, it's an enrollment game, unfortunately, and it looks like the potential 8th grade team next year would be 1 team, not 2 based on numbers, but that is yet to be determined until we look at their enrollment and start doing their scheduling, but we're not doing that until we do the high school scheduling because we need the waterfall effect. So it sounds more complicated than it is, but yes, science and social studies has to go to a full year based on the DESE regs, based upon the curriculums that we've adopted. So that will happen. It's just a matter of what teams need, what grade levels need 2 teams versus 1 team moving forward. And if that team is a 7th grade team next year, can they follow their next year into being an 8th grade team and have that flexibility with licensing? So, and a lot of this, obviously, as you know, has to be discussed with the union and clarified with all of them. So we're getting closer to having a lot of these answers, but need to solidify numbers with the enrollment at the high school first and then do the waterfall.
Are you hoping that change is going to take place next school year?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Not hoping, it's definite, like the full year
It will.
science and
Okay.
social studies has to take place. And it has to take place because of the curriculum scope and sequence, and giving our students what they need has to be priority. And that is definitely been something in the works that we've talked about in the past year and are certainly going to implement moving forward.
Okay. Okay. The next piece was about arts and music, basically. So is there anything that members wanted to say specifically about this topic? There were a bunch of different ideas that were brought up. Clearly, there's still a lot of interest in supporting arts and music programming and developing it in the district. And there was like a variety of directions that went. Elizabeth?
I think that the general feeling was just a desire for a way to have a dedicated band teacher for each school, for the middle school and for the high school, because they were saying that it was being split and then that was causing an issue. And then the general feeling was just to have more of it. But the most pressing seemed to be splitting. I don't know the exact details of how that works, but that is what was told to me.
And Anne?
So AEL really wants to bring music back. But aside from that, it seemed like non-music arts, just more creative outlets, because we have been investing in music. And I want to make sure we don't forget non-sonic arts.
Is there anything you would add about this, Karen, or have
Well,
in the works?
I caution everyone, we can bring back everything that you want to bring back and we can propose it in a budget, but we also have to be fiscally responsible with our assignments of staffing. So we do the best we can with a lot of, for instance, just the shared staff between the middle and high school. It may not feel like it works to some people, but it works in terms of scheduling that Unit A folks because there is no other classes available for that person to teach. So there, we have to assign where we have the need, and we certainly can create numerous additional positions. With regards to AEL, I understand their desire, but with their current contractually obligated schedule, their prep is not needed to be covered because they have half days on Friday, and specials really are to cover teacher preps. So our first priority would be to assign those specialists at schools where that coverage is needed. I know there was more course selections in the music and arts offered in the program of studies this year that GHS students could choose from. So when we get to look at those numbers, we certainly will be able to determine what the staffing needs are. But until I know that, I'm not sure where, the potential asks will be. And I know that the librarian issue has come up because it's a UA at the middle school and not a true quote unquote librarian. They do teach children. So that is another thing that the committee will have to consider, because a UA might be needed. And if you're going to add an additional librarian, it's just an additional cost of another person on the GMS staff. So, I mean, all of these things I know are important, and we want our kids to have great experiences, but we also have to think about the schedule with which we present to meet the staffing needs as well as meet budgetary needs.
Okay. I think those were all of the uh, like staff FTE related items that were on this list. There were other asks related to things. So technology, I think, is something that is always on the docket when it comes to budget development, because you can't ever leave it alone. Things just go obsolete so quickly. Uh, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there is anything that is a definite in terms of FY26 planning with regards to technology and technology updates. Karen?
So we did a pretty good job district-wide with technological updates using ESSER funds. We did add it to our capital requests for FY27 because we are going to have to continually support the constant technological changing needs of the district and have to have some cycle of support for that. I don't know historically, I think Andy probably could speak to it a little better, though, if those capital requests for technology have ever been supported. And maybe that's why we ended up having a 10-year-old ESSER need to, replace the majority of what the district currently owned. So I think that's something we're going to have to really be consciously aware of moving forward, especially with the ever-changing tech issues that constantly arise on a daily basis.
Okay. And was there anything you wanted to add about technology?
Just something from AEL that I thought was interesting was they suggested getting hand-me-downs when the other schools upgrade their technology, which I know doesn't work for everything. Like those Chromebooks, they've got their lifespan, and once it's done, it's done. Um, yeah. And then grants. I mean, anything we can get grant covered for technology, we should.
Yeah, I saw that like wishes for grants came up a few times, and my thinking on that was, is this not under the responsibility of the assistant superintendent?
Yes, we look weekly, every Monday, at anything that's put out there, either, we get updates from MASS. We also get updates from DESE. We get the commissioner's guidance every week. So any grant we can apply for, we do apply for, and then try to figure out how we can maximize the grant requirements to fulfill the district needs. So it's definitely something we do weekly.
Are staff familiar with the procedure they need to follow to suggest a particular grant or to express a need for grant funding for a thing?
Yes. Most of the time, though, they don't go directly to staff. No staff member can apply on behalf of the district. So
Right.
we have a lot of teachers that will find things and then they just shoot Stephen and I an email and say, hey, can we apply for this? And then we say, yes, let's write it together. Or tell us what you would use it for. Why do we need this? And then we go through the motions of actually deciding if it's funds that we can use, because sometimes grant requirements are very strict, as you know, and it may sound good in theory until you get down to the nuts and bolts of what they'll actually allow you to use the money for. And then the timelines are also another thing. So sometimes you get into it with a staff member and then you're like, well, you have 2 weeks to use the money. As you know,
Right.
they give you these ridiculous time constraints. So sometimes that is a reason why we kind of just either go with it or don't. But
Okay.
they know how to, talk to any of us that we can certainly look into. But more often than not, we're reaching out to staff saying, hey, we're going to apply this. We'll need staff support in the funding of that grant. And is it worth it for us to go through like the Accelerated Academy one that Stephen just applied for vacation support for intervention, so that there's no vacation slumps and we can have, quote unquote, school during February and April break to provide support for students. That can't happen unless we have the support of staff. So before we apply for these things, it's sometimes the opposite. We're asking them if they're going to be willing to do the work.
Right. Well, I just want to say I love that grant so much and I hope that that works out.
I know. Well, you're going to get an update Wednesday too.
All
I'm
right.
excited about it as well.
Okay. So that's it, I think, in terms of this list, except for the building related stuff. And Karen, I sent you this list already by email, and I think what I would like to do is to uh address all of the building related concerns or needs during the walkthrough tour, which usually takes place in January, and to which school committee members and the city council are invited so that everyone can see with their own eyes what is what in our buildings. Would that be possible?
Sure can.
Okay.
And that would be January 31st. That is the
Yeah.
PD day. So I have that, but I have it on my report for Wednesday, but I will also add it to my
Okay.
city council update when I go next week with them to invite them.
All right. We'll give them embossed invitations this time and hope they all come. Okay. So that is it. Is there anything else, Anne, that you wanted to talk about in terms of FY26 operating feedback?
I'm just skimming through my notes, and I think the only thing we didn't touch on was from Newton with their wanting weekend backpacks for food insecure families, and I don't
Right.
know what we can do there. I don't know how that would work.
Right. I did not put that on the list because there was only one mention of that. But that's true, Karen. There was an interest in having weekend backpacks for food.
I can talk with Greta, our food service director, but I don't know where the funding for those kinds of items would come into play.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And anything else?
Everything else from my list we have talked about.
Okay. All right. So, Elizabeth departed just a few minutes ago because she has a hard stop at 1:30. So it's just you and I am going to move to adjourn.
I will
Would you
second
like to
that.
second me? And I will say yes.
And I will vote yes to adjourn.
Then this meeting is adjourned at 1:39 p.m. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.